And Forestry Committee, welcome everyone this afternoon. I hope you voted already on the first vote. There are 2 votes. There's a vote now, and then I informed the floor we'd be coming in at the back end of the second vote. So welcome, Secretary Vilsack. We're so glad that you are here today. And as we start, I wanted to just mention 2 of our colleagues, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith, are in Minnesota for a funeral and not able to be with us, but wanted to submit information for the record and just wanted to indicate, Mr. Secretary, they're sorry they couldn't be here with you today, but there's a very sad, very important funeral relating to some officers that were killed in Minnesota. So they're not with us today. Secretary Vilsack, your leadership is essential to our shared goal of keeping farmers farming, families fed, and rural communities strong. And I share the concerns of my colleagues that after recent years of record farm income, new trends show that farming continues to be one of the riskiest businesses there is. This makes it abundantly clear what I've been saying for months. It's time to get together on a bipartisan farm bill that supports our farmers, big and small, and helps rural communities thrive. A farm bill is always the art of the possible. How do we reach bipartisan solutions to the challenges American families and farmers and rural communities face? That requires creativity. And I appreciate your willingness, Mr. Secretary, and the department's willingness to work with us to find creative solutions to important needs. Together, we have already made significant progress. In October, with your leadership, we secured, Senator Boozman and I, $2.3 billion, working with you from the Commodity Credit Corporation that will double funding for the trade promotion programs over the next 5 years, and ramp up the donation of American-grown food to address a growing crisis of hunger around the world. So we appreciate very much your partnership with us. Also, in the lead up to the Farm Bill a year ago, we came together on a bipartisan basis to secure $350 million in additional funding to support the rice and cotton industries in the appropriations process. And in November, we secured a bipartisan extension of the Farm Bill that fully funded all of the programs that do not have 10-year baseline funding. They have been dubbed the orphan programs, and we work together to keep the Farm Bill whole. And I so appreciate Senator Boozman's partnership in that. All of these actions show what is possible when we work together. I'm very pleased to have secured a commitment also from our majority leader to invest several billion dollars in new resources into the 2014 Farm Bill to support our efforts to meet the needs of farmers and ranchers. And I should tell you, this is no small accomplishment, because I remember the first Farm Bill that I chaired in 2014 when the leadership in the Senate asked us or required us to cut $20 billion out of the Farm Bill, and that was extremely difficult. And so it's nice to be in a situation when we can add some resources. We need to use all the tools in our toolbox and even craft some new ones to help improve the safety net for farmers. That, of course, starts with crop insurance as the foundation of the farm safety net, because it has the ability to reach nearly all producers with timely, targeted assistance. For some disasters, however, we also need additional help. Unfortunately, ad hoc emergency assistance can be delayed and inconsistent. In some years, 75% or more of losses are covered, and in other years, it can be as little as 25%, depending on appropriations. And it's still uncertain if anything will be available for 2023 disasters. The Farm Bill can be an opportunity to add more certainty and reliability and fairness. The Farm Bill is also an investment in American families, workers, and rural communities. SNAP is the foundation of the safety net for American families who need just a little help to make ends meet, usually just for a while. The bipartisan evaluation of SNAP that we directed in the 2018 Farm Bill, after 50 years of the program, resulted in just an additional $1.40 per day per person, bringing benefits to about $6 a day to help folks put food on the table. But this was enough to lift 1 million children out of poverty. That's 1 million children who will now have the support they need to become happy, healthy, and productive members of their communities. This is a bipartisan achievement that we should all be proud of. In the last Congress, we also made historic investments in conservation, rural development, and energy to address the climate crisis, which is hitting farmers' bottom lines every day across the country. That is now being put to work on farms and fields across America. As I said earlier, the Farm Bill is the art of the possible. It's where we can reach bipartisan solutions that help keep farmers farming, families fed, and rural communities strong. We can also invest in rural hospitals and childcare, which we've had hearings on. I know people care about deeply. Last year alone, more than 5 million rural Americans benefited from the Biden administration's investments in rural health care through USDA programs. And USDA was the first agency, and I want to thank you for this, Secretary Vilsack, the first agency to get high-speed internet funding into rural communities through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We can continue to build on the improvements we've made to grow the connections between local farmers, local businesses, local families. So, Secretary Vilsack, your leadership and partnership will be essential as we seek to find creative solutions to a bipartisan path to get a bipartisan farm bill done. And we so appreciate your being here and your testimony today. And I want to turn now to my partner and ranking member, Senator Boozman.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Chair, for calling today's important hearing. Welcome to the committee. The lead from a February 15th story in AgriPulse reporting on a presentation made by USDA's chief economist at the Ag Outlook Forum read, quote, USDA is forecasting lower prices for most major crops this year as input costs remain elevated and farmers face growing export competition. A week earlier, end quote, USDA forecasted that net farm income would decrease by 27.1% or $43.1 billion when adjusted for inflation over the last year. When you consider that since 2022, inflation-adjusted net farm income has dropped by $80 billion, this will be the largest two-year decline in net farm income of all time. We welcome you back to the committee, and as we continue our work to reauthorize the Farm Bill, we are interested in your perspective on the challenges in the farm economy. As part of our efforts to write a new Farm Bill, we've been to numerous states across the country, and I visited with hundreds of farmers, as has the chair. What I've heard from our nation's farmers and ranchers is that they're very concerned. Specifically, they're challenged by persistently high and historic inflation, both on and off the farm, stubbornly high interest rates, burdensome regulations, record large trade deficits in agriculture, and most importantly of all, rapidly declining commodity prices and farm incomes that will make these next 5 years some of the most challenging in their lives. Compared to last year, all sectors of agriculture and all areas of the country will see lower incomes in 2024. Some have pointed to a 20-year average of farm income as evidence that the farm economy is healthy. And we should talk about a 20-year averages because current interest expenses are nearly double that average. Likewise, input costs are 10% above the 20-year average. So while we hear talk of net farm income being above or near the 20-year average, it's often not accompanied by those data points that reinforce the tight margins under which farmers operate. I don't know why for some a 20-year average income is acceptable for farmers, but it isn't for other workers. When there were labor strikes recently, I don't remember the administration calling for a 20-year average wages for workers. But for farmers, this is supposed to be okay. When I'm talking to producers from across the country, they are sharing their concerns that they now must use their land and other assets as collateral to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a crop in the ground or care for livestock, while knowing they will earn less money. Many are wondering if it's worth it. Typically, the rate of return on farm assets is less than 2%. You can get 2.5 times that earning in any CD. This is particularly true for small and mid-sized farms, the very type of family operations that has been put so much emphasis on. I'm concerned about their viability as well. When I grew up, we had more dairies in my home county than we currently have in the entire state of Arkansas. That loss of population impacts the local economy, our schools, our hospitals, and makes life in rural America less desirable. I've seen that as I've traveled through Arkansas' 75 counties. But if we truly care about rural communities and our farm and ranch families, farming at all scales must be economically viable, and we must provide a safety net that works. That is why I've called for in the next Farm Bill, and I believe that is what I've called for in the next Farm Bill, and I believe that is the very least that we can do for our farmers. The administration can be doing more to ease the worries in farm country. Its regulatory agenda has made crop protection tools less available and added more uncertainty for our farmers. I'm troubled like things like ERP2, 30 by 30, and the lack of leadership when it comes to trade. All of these decisions tell me that our farmers' concerns are not being heard at the executive branch. I do believe in the next Farm Bill, a $1.5 trillion Farm Bill, we have the opportunity to make things right for farmers, rural communities, and those in need. But it takes a commitment for all of us to work together towards these very worthy goals. No one in the history of this committee has said that passing a farm bill is an easy lift, but it's something that this committee, with the help of previous administrations, has come together to accomplish time and time again. I did not believe that this farm bill should be any different. I hope today's hearing will shed more light on how USDA can be a partner to accomplish these goals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to officially welcome our Secretary, Tom Vilsack. He's no stranger to the Senate Agriculture Committee, having been the only member of President Obama's cabinet to serve all 8 years, and he has reprised his role in the Biden administration, and we are very fortunate to have his steady and experienced hand at USDA. As a former governor of Iowa, a former member of the Iowa State Senate, and a former mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Secretary Vilsack knows very well the importance of programs we are discussing today for rural America. So Secretary Vilsack, welcome, and you are recognized for 5 minutes of testimony, any other information you want to provide for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Appreciate the opportunity that the committee has afforded to me. In my office, I have a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. I see it every day. I often read his works and his words, and recently I came across a relatively well-known phrase of his, which is, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I suppose that there are many applications to that statement today here in Washington, D.C., but I want to utilize it to address the state of agriculture in rural America. We just finished the best 3 years of net farm cash income in the history of the United States, on the one hand. On the other hand, as Senator Bozeman has just indicated, we are now returning to near historic norms this year in terms of farm income. It's a combination of input costs as well as lower commodity prices, which are a result of bumper crops globally, a strong U.S. economy and a strong U.S. dollar, a weaker global economy, and certainly a weaker Chinese economy, all of which impact and affect our ability. It's interesting that the farm income is not equitably divided among all farmers. The top 7% of our farmers, who represent roughly 150,000 farms, about a third of which are owned by investors, received 85% of the income over the last 5 years, which meant that 93%, or 1.7 million farm families, had to share 15% of the income. At the same time, the median farm income for the families was significantly higher than median family income across the United States. 88%, however, of farm families work off the farm. And in fact, a majority of the income utilized by those families is generated from off-farm income. Our farm story here in the United States has been one of tremendous productivity. In the 1970s, we established a directive to farmers to produce. We were told farmers were to plant fence row to fence row, and farmers responded. We've seen a fourfold increase in productivity over the course of the last 50 or 60 years. But at the same time, we saw a corresponding consolidation of farm land and farm loss. Madam Chair, to put this in proper perspective, we've lost 544,970 farms since 1981, when Bob Berglund, then Secretary of Agriculture, warned about consolidation of farms. We've lost 155 million acres of farm land that was at one time farmed, that is no longer being farmed today. To give you a sense of how many farms that is, that represents roughly half of all the farms represented by this committee today. The farmland represents the entire land mass of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, and a good part of Virginia. This has had a long-term impact on rural communities, and we've seen over the course of time reduced job growth, high unemployment, and high poverty. However, recently, we've seen an upturn in the rural economy. Jobs have now returned to pre-pandemic levels. The unemployment rate is down to historic lows. The poverty rate is down. And for the first time in quite some time, persistent poverty is down. In fact, 55 counties that were categorized as persistently poor have left that list. Those are counties that in the past had a poverty rate of over 20% for decades. We've now seen a net decline in the number of counties in that persistently poverty category. I think it raises a question that we ask at USDA, and I suspect you do too. Are we okay with farm loss? Are we okay with farmland being consolidated? Are we okay with income being so concentrated? Are we okay with the notion, as has been expressed in the past, about getting big or getting out as being the only option for farm families? Or is there an alternative? An alternative where, rather than the farmer working two jobs, can't we create opportunities that the farm itself creates multiple sources of revenue so that the farmer doesn't have to work two full-time jobs to keep the farm? That's why we're focused at USDA on more new and better markets, on climate-smart agriculture, on renewable energy, on local and regional food systems, as creating an opportunity for new and additional income sources to provide opportunities for farmers to do what they love to do and to do what they want to do, which is to pass that opportunity on to the next generation. I look forward to the questions from the committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much. And for the committee, we'll do one round of 7 minutes, so we have a little bit more time for folks because we have the Secretary with us. So, Mr. Secretary, let me start by saying thank you for working with Senator Boozman and I last fall to create the Regional Agricultural Promotion Program through the CCC to invest an additional $2.3 billion in what has been really one of the top two requests of all the commodity groups during the hearings that we've done, both crop insurance, number one, wanting to double marketing assistance as being number two. And so this is very important to us. We actually haven't seen an increase in trade marketing assistance now for many years. And so this is very, very important. So can you talk about the status of this new trade money as well as the food aid money, the commodity purchases, which are very important, and their ability to help farmers build markets and feed those in need?
We've taken those resources and, first of all, on the trade side, we are focusing them on the trade markets that are not in the top four markets, because we already spend and invest marketing resources in a significant amount in those top four markets. So starting with Japan and moving on down the list of market opportunities, we're trying to increase presence, increase promotions, and increase people in those alternative markets. This allows us to begin the process of diversifying away from an over-reliance on one or two markets, China in particular. And so that process is beginning and will continue for the next several years. We've already allocated resources to a series of cooperators to enhance and encourage and expand opportunity. We've also created a special opportunity for specialty crop exports, enabling some training and education on how specialty crop producers might be able to take better advantage of export opportunities. On the international food aid side, we're working with USAID, which is the entity that basically directs where those resources are most needed and when they are most needed, and we'll continue to work with them to get those resources to countries, commodities to countries as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I've also heard some concerns about potential for this funding to be revoked by a future Congress, or that the targeted regions might limit new markets for certain crops. Are you willing to work with us to really look at the possibility of offering longer-term contracts and adjustments to targeted regions in future rounds of funding?
Absolutely. I think the key here is to encourage diversification of market opportunities so that we're not, as I said earlier, over-reliant on a single market. We saw what happened when the trade war occurred several years ago. Commodity prices tanked, and there was a substantial amount of CCC money that was used to bail farmers out. I'm pretty sure people don't want to see a return to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to thank you for putting $100 million into an initiative to focus on the unique export challenges of specialty crops. Our specialty crops don't qualify for everything in the Farm Bill, not the commodity title. We're working on crop insurance to make sure that that continues to be effective, but they certainly have special challenges, and I would just ask that you work to ensure that any application process there is streamlined and workable for those farmers.
Oh, happy to do that.
In crop insurance, we know that selling and servicing a whole farm revenue program and other policies that serve specialty crops and smaller operations can vary significantly. This is been a real challenge. The standard reinsurance agreement includes flexibility for the FCIC board to adjust reimbursements for delivery expenses that vary significantly. Using this flexibility seems like it could allow an adjustment without opening up agreements and avoiding other appropriations issues or farm bill issues and so on. Can you have RMA look into this and put this item on the FCIC board's agenda to consider adjustments to reimbursements for delivery expenses?
Would be happy to work with you, Madam Chair, on that issue, especially since there are a number of new projects and products that have been offered just in the last couple of years, 12 new policies and 50 modifications to existing policies. Obviously, in some cases, that may have increased the workload, so it's fair to ask the question of whether or not there ought to be additional reimbursement.
Great, thank you. Just last week, USDA announced that all of the 2023 IRA conservation funds were out the door. Congratulations, in the hands of farmers, and that 11 out of the top 15 practices across all of NRCS are among the practices that are being supported. Can you talk with us about these practices, how farmers are using the money, and what has it meant for traditional funded programs, EQIP, which of course is so popular, and getting conservation on the ground for all the purposes in all the areas. We've seen in the new NRCS data that 49 of the top 50 EQIP practices saw an increase in funding when looking across both the IRA conservation money and traditional Farm Bill money. So I wonder if you could speak about that.
First of all, there was a record number of NRCS contracts entered into as a result of the IRA, over 45,000, I believe, between 45 and 48,000. Having said that, there were significantly greater numbers of people applying for those resources, which is why we're excited about the opportunity this year to meet additional need. To give you an example, EQIP had $250 million available, but there were 8,000 applications for those resources for a total of $405 million. The RCPP program, which you helped to craft in a previous Farm Bill, received $250 million of IRA money. The request was $2 billion, almost 8 times the amount. So this is an incredibly popular opportunity for us to utilize all of the practices that we know from science will make a difference in terms of increased productivity, better soil health, better water quality, more efficient use of resources and inputs, which is really the purpose of this. And we're excited about the opportunity. We've added some additional people at NRCS because of the IRA resources, and we are streamlining the processes as well to make it easier for people to apply for multiple programs at once. So all of that's taking place.
Thank you. And then finally, quickly, how does, on a different topic, how does spending on Farm Bill programs interact with spending on nutrition programs? For example, when USDA reevaluated the Thrifty Food Plan after 50 years of operation, did that process or the outcome at all affect spending on commodity programs, disaster programs, or crop insurance?
No.
Okay, thank you.
You said quickly, so.
Yes, thank you very much. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. The reality is that the farm economy will experience the steepest two-year decline of all time, down $80 billion from 2022. I've had the opportunity to be with a lot of farmers, as we all have in the last year and a half. Invariably, the first thing that's mentioned is the need to have better risk management tools, including reference prices, making sure crop insurance is going to be able to do the job. Right now, March corn futures are at $4.30. Last week, they were below $4. So the situation now is more difficult than we were out in the field so much. So you've commented on the challenge Congress faces to direct funds to the numerous competing priorities in the Farm Bill. As a solution, you've offered that the Secretary can exercise the Commodity Credit Corporation authority to address the farm safety net shortcomings that may arise in the future. Can you tell us about the guidance you've received from the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Management and Budget, or others that describes how the CCC could be used to provide new resources to Title I and increase statutory reference prices?
Actually, Senator, what I said was not what you indicated. What I said was that I'd be happy to work with Congress to find a creative way to utilize the resources of the CCC to try to address some of the concerns that you all have relative to reference prices, as I did when you requested assistance in trade and international food assistance, which I'm more than happy to do. Happy to sit down with you. Our team is happy to sit down and explore what creative ways we could use the CCC. I think there's a tendency on the part of folks to think that the Farm Bill is the only thing that we should be focused on. There really is, there's the budget, there's the Farm Bill, there's the IRA, and there's the CCC, and I think all of those basically can work collaboratively together to try to address the issues that divide you all on in terms of a Farm Bill today.
Even though your testimony fails to mention the SNAP program, it's an important topic for today's hearing with the backdrop of the looming Farm Bill reauthorization. USDA has estimated the Thrifty Food reevaluation increased SNAP costs by nearly $20 billion in 2022 alone. Has USDA determined the total cost of the 2021 Thrifty Food Plan reevaluation across all nutrition programs, such as the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, and others whose costs are based on the TFP?
You know, Senator, I'm not sure that we've made that calculation. I'd be more than happy to ask our staff to look at it. Having said that, you know, I think what we did was justified and appropriate because the whole point of the SNAP program is to provide help and assistance to families based on the reality of what they live in. What we had not done in SNAP, which we did do a couple of years ago, was to actually ask the question, how much does it actually cost at the grocery store and what in fact are people buying? Not assuming what they're buying, but what in fact are they buying? And from that, we obviously calculated an increase, which for families meant an opportunity to avoid some very serious consequences, especially when the emergency allotments were lifted off. But I'm more than happy to take a look at this. And happy to take into consideration anything else that you want us to consider. At the end of the day, you know, there are many ways in which we can look at the SNAP program, but one thing is that we're seeing fewer people using it today, so the expectation is the cost is going to come down a little bit.
The GAO made 8 recommendations to the Department for future TFP reevaluations, and USDA has only implemented 4 of those recommendations. Could the next TFP reevaluation begin before USDA has closed out the remaining recommendations made by GAO? We've
made a concerted effort to work with GAO to close audits and reports, Senator, so I'm certain that we will do this on a timely way. If you talk to GAO, you'll find that we've been very, very cooperative, much more so than previous administrations.
So when do you think you'll get the 4 done?
I don't have a specific timeline for you today, Senator, but I'll be happy to get it for you.
Could you?
But I'm sure it's not going to be. I'm sure it will be before we have to reevaluate the Thrifty Food Plan.
So you could reevaluate it without doing it, though. Is that what you're saying? Or?
No, what I'm saying is that we will take the actions that GAO has requested prior to any reevaluation of the Thrifty Food Plan, because we are focused on making sure that we work collaboratively with GAO on recommendations and audits, as we do also with OIG.
Okay. Thank you. In May of last year, USDA issued the initial study plan for the 2026 TFP reevaluation. My understanding is USDA is awaiting additional data to inform this reevaluation, such as scanner data on food prices and the recommended 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. Do you have any insight on how this information will impact the cost of the TFP to taxpayers, and when you do expect USDA will begin the process for the 2026 reevaluation of the TFP?
Well, obviously we don't know because we don't have the information, but I think it is appropriate for us to ask for this information. It gets back to the point that I made earlier, which is we have to deal with what actually is happening in the marketplace in terms of actual costs, and we also have to have a better understanding of what families actually use and need. I can go into great detail about the way this was done before in terms of the assumptions about families that were struggling financially, but they were not lined up to the reality of families. The amount of time preparing food from scratch, the amount of beans and other items that were purchased that just are not aligned with everyday American life today. So it's important for us to have that information to be able to make an informed set of decisions.
Right. I'm concerned, I know a lot of us are concerned about California's Prop 12 and the impact that a patchwork of state laws on animal housing will have on producers, particularly at a time when hog producers are already in the midst of a prolonged period of prices below break even. You've stated Congress should intervene to prevent chaos in the marketplace resulting from Prop 12 and other similar initiatives. Can you describe the marketplace disruption you foresee if Congress does not choose to address the Prop 12 and similar initiatives?
Well, you've got 50 states that essentially could make decisions based on their own individual value system and based on their own agricultural economy. We literally as a country tried this at the beginning of this country with the Articles of Confederation, where we gave states basically the ability to make decisions, and the reality was it was chaos, which is why we have a constitution. Look, I totally understand why Californians would want to regulate what happens within the four borders of the corners of their state in terms of their own producers, but I don't think the Supreme Court, when it decided that pork producers had a choice to participate in the California market or not, understood the pork market. When you're dealing with 12% of the pork market in one state, there is not a choice between doing business with in California and not in California. You're essentially going to it's going to be driven by that requirement, which is going to make it very, very difficult. So I think at some point in time, somebody's got to provide some degree of consistency and clarity. Otherwise, you are just inviting 50 different states to do 50 different iterations of this. And if farmers, they don't need the chaos, they need clarity and certainty.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. I don't have a complaint. We have the best USDA people in Vermont. We're so grateful for that. So I'm going to accuse you of hiring good people. I hope you don't take that the wrong way. But Sarah Waring, John Roberts, Travis Thomason, and then you met with Dr. Basil Gooden, Sochi Torres-Small, my former colleague in the House. She came up, Undersecretary Robert Bonney came up after our disaster, Deputy Undersecretary Farah Ahmad. I just want to say, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Bozeman, it's really been very responsive. It's heartening to Vermonters that there's been such a response from the department, and I thank you for that. A couple of questions. What I understand is farmers no one works harder. It gets less of the action. It's like 12% of the food dollar goes to the farmers.
It's less than 15 cents, but if you take the input costs out, it's about 7 cents.
Yeah, but that's unbelievable and, not really sustainable no matter who our farmers are. So I appreciate the emphasis you have in trying to boost those farm incomes, and there's some ways to do that through energy efficiency, get some of those input costs down and maybe even get some income up. And our farms have been trying to take advantage of that. And a number of farms that I visited are really being able to take advantage and get some boosted income and lower cost. And that's like the REAP programs. And I just want you to comment on, do you have any suggestions that might help us make it more possible for more farms, particularly our smaller farms that are under such pressure, to access USDA programs like REAP?
Well, I will say that we've already done over 5,800 REAP grants as a result of the IRA, and we're getting the word out about it. And I think you're going to continue to see thousands of more of those grants. We recently announced resources for small distributive wind projects. Now, there's an example of an opportunity for farmers and for those who are in the small wind distribution system to get the word out about REAP, which will allow farmers to utilize 1 or 2 megawatt opportunities to reduce their costs. Honestly, Senator, I think the thing that you could do that would have the most profound impact would be to figure out ways in which you could encourage the establishment of cooperatives between farmers who can produce excess energy on their farm and be able to coordinate that excess energy and provide it to RECs and to municipal utilities that are looking to convert or transition from fossil fuel-based to renewables. It's one of the reasons why the PACE program and the New ERA program, which is part of IRA, is very, very popular. And you're going to see a lot of that happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A good suggestion. I want to talk a little bit about crop insurance for the small farmers in Vermont. As you may know, in May we had a freeze that really hurt a lot of our orchards. And then we had a big flood in July, and it wiped out the crops for the specialty crops. Why we call it specialty as opposed to vegetables is a mystery to me. Vegetables are good for you. But it was really tough because under the existing programs, it's like a vegetable producer had to be able to account for how much spinach and how much coriander, how much whatever. And we've introduced the Weather Act, which is intended to try to make it much more streamlined for some of these small farmers. And by the way, they are small, their incomes are relatively small, but they play a huge role in the local community and keep that land open. So it's very important to us, and I'm sure my colleagues have similar situations in their own states. Can you speak to some of the administrative policies that USDA is considering to ensure that the NAP disaster assistance and other crop insurance programs are more responsive to these really small dairy and diversified farms that we have in Vermont, in the Northeast and elsewhere?
Well, we've increased, as I said earlier, new crop insurance products for a number of the fruits and vegetable products that are grown across the country. We've also modified existing policies to expand coverage. We've established and increased opportunities under the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program, which could be available. We've also made it easier to qualify under NAPE, which is the program that's available for those who don't have crop insurance. We've also taken a look at ways in which we can expand protection under the Micro Farm Program. We expanded the amounts of coverage and opportunities under those programs so that it would cover a greater number. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to try to use risk management tools to the extent we can. We're now covering 540 million acres in the U.S. and 42 million head of livestock, and that's been a significant expansion in the last 3 years.
Okay. With this disaster that we had, we've got a lot of small towns, as I know you do in Iowa. A lot of towns under 2,500, they don't have the technical capacity. Rural development has generally been very helpful. But my question is whether we should consider having technical assistance programming specifically for towns that are having these emergencies where it doesn't have to be competitive in a big application process. You've got a disaster, they need help. You've got the capacity for technical assistance. Can we get that to them right away?
That's a good suggestion.
How do we implement it?
Rural development needs to have the resources and the ability and the permission from Congress to basically utilize resources.
Well, I'm glad you think it's a good suggestion because it's really tough. I mean, essentially what happens when you have a flood and it's a small town is the select board starts going through the Rolodex and find out who's got a backhoe, who's got a truck, who's got a front end loader. But there's ongoing things that need to be done, and that technical assistance is really helpful.
A number of communities have regional government associations, which basically provide that service as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much. We'll now go to Senator Ernst and then Senator Bennett. And just for the members, the second vote has started. So we will continue, but yes.
Great.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks so much, Mr. Secretary. It's great to have you in front of us today and always great to have another Iowan here. And last month, I kicked off my yearly River to River tour and going back and forth across the state of Iowa from the Mississippi River on our eastern side to the Missouri on the western side of the state. And while I've been out visiting, one of the questions that continues to stand out is when Congress will come together and pass a farm bill. You know, our ag groups are really, really active out there in our town halls. And our producers in rural communities, they deserve to have a comprehensive 5-year piece of legislation that provides them with certainty. For us to be resorting to a kick the can down the road mentality isn't an option for our farmers and our ranchers, and it should not be an option for Congress either. So I truly hope we can come to the table and negotiate a bill that actually focuses on the farm. So Secretary Vilsack, before I dig into some of those ag-specific questions, I'd like to address some of the work policies at the Department of Agriculture. We're just weeks away from the 4-year anniversary of federal buildings being temporarily closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you know, GAO says that your headquarters has a space utilization rate of just 11%. It has gotten so bad that one of your employees went so far as to write me an anonymous letter that I do have with me today, Madam Chair, and I would like to submit that to the record, please.
So ordered without objection.
And let me read to you just a few sentences, and I quote, "The vast majority of USDA employees are not working in person. On the occasions I have gone to USDA headquarters in Washington, D.C., it resembles a ghost town." Your employee then goes on to say, "Remote work and telework employees are often unreachable and do not respond to simple email questions for hours." So with that, Mr. Secretary, knowing your own staff is recognizing issues with the policies that are currently put into place, how many days per week do you require your DC-based managers and employees covered by collective bargaining agreements to be physically in the office?
A majority of the week.
Okay, and what would that majority of the week be?
For some, it's 3 days, and for some, it's 4 days.
Okay, and yet the occupancy is 11%.
No, it's not,
according
Senator.
to.
Senator, that is not correct.
Okay.
That is not correct. That's not even close to correct.
Well, that's from the Government Accountability Office.
I don't know what the date is of that or the date of the letter that you just referred to, but I can tell you that is not what's happening in February of 2024.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Other than supervisor oversight, what does the USDA do to monitor those federal employees that are working remotely to make sure that they are actually working?
Well, first of all, to suggest that they're not working, I think is an affront to the hardworking members of the USDA family. I can show you chapter and verse of all the work that's getting done at USDA. I can tell you how many home loans, how many farm loans, how many NRCS contracts have been entered, and I can guarantee you, compared to other administrations, this team is working their tail off, okay? So please don't tell me the work's not getting done, because I can show you that it is.
Well, and we'll take that up because we do receive calls at the office where our constituents are having trouble with USDA. So we'll continue to forward those questions on to you. Federal employees' official work site that defines their location-based pay requires them to show up to the office at least once a week, but this standard is waivable on an employee-by-employee basis. Do you know how many exceptions to the standard twice in a pay period standard has the USDA issued since the pandemic, and has the agency revoked any of these exemptions?
I don't know the specific answer to that, but I can tell you that 82% of hours nationally are worked in person in offices.
Okay, 82%?
82%.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So moving on to other issues. Another issue that I know is top of mind, especially for Iowans, is E15. Last week, we saw an announcement from the administration that it would adhere to the 8 Midwest governors' request for year-round E15. I welcome this. I think it's long overdue, and I applaud the work of both Governor Kim Reynolds and Attorney General Brenna Byrd. But we know that pushing off implementation until 2025 is very discouraging for those in that area. So with the 2024 summer driving season approaching, Iowa families, our corn farmers, our ethanol producers, and the fuel retailers still have no idea if E15 will be at the pump this summer. So hearing some of the statements that you have made, it appears as if you are confident that the EPA will announce another emergency waiver. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In your discussions with the administration and the EPA, when do you believe we can expect to see an announcement for nationwide E15 sales this summer?
I think it's consistent with the last 2 years when they issued a waiver. I could be wrong about this, Senator. I thought it was in the April timeframe, but whenever it was done last year, I'm pretty sure that they will have the resources and the data necessary to make the decision and have this decision stick.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I do hope that you'll continue to lean into the administration on this as well. And earlier this month, and in regards to moving on to SNAP, I'll go ahead and submit the question for the record, Madam Chair, because I do see that I'm running out of time. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman Stabenow. I appreciate very much your holding the hearing. And Secretary, thank you for coming back to the committee and for your public service and your leadership as well. Madam Chair, before I pose my questions this afternoon, I wanted to pay tribute to a great man who we lost this weekend. Today, in the West, we mourn the loss of Mr. Pat O'Toole, a cattle and sheep rancher whose family's 6th-generation operation straddles the Colorado-Wyoming border. Pat lived a life of service. He served as president of the Family Farm Alliance for nearly 20 years and on the board of directors for Solutions from the Land, and was a former member of the Wyoming's House of Representatives. And when I came into the Senate in 2009, Pat helped bring me up to speed on Colorado and Western agriculture and Western water. In 2018, I had the pleasure to visit his and his wife Sharon's ranch nestled in the Little Snake River Valley. And on a moment's notice, Pat brought together people from all over the West to join us at his ranch for a lamb barbecue while we talked about forestry and water and conservation challenges. In my view, Pat and his family's ranch is a shining example of productive agriculture, habitat conservation, and sustainable land stewardship coexisting on our Western landscapes. Pat was a fervent advocate for Western issues, and I know Secretary Vilsack knows this well. Of all that Pat did, his greatest priority was his family, his wife Sharon, their 3 children and 6 grandchildren. He managed the ranch with future generations in mind, and before he passed, he started the process to preserve his ranch through a USDA conservation easement. As a community, we're profoundly grateful for his dedicated service, his commitment to conservation, and his generosity. Secretary Vilsack, I didn't mean to demote you. Secretary Vilsack, is there anything you'd like to say about Pat O'Toole today?
Senator, I just want to associate myself with those words. Pat was an incredibly passionate individual who believed very strongly that there was a better way and was committed to not only his operation sort of paving the way and showing and modeling a better way, but encouraging others. He was a force, and we are saddened by his loss.
Senator Bennett, I'm going to just also ask that you give best to the family and our condolences. So thank you for raising this.
Thank you very much for doing that. I was, as you know, I was in Ukraine this weekend and had the opportunity to talk to Sharon on the way back from Shannon Airport, of all places. So that was an appropriate place to reach her in Ireland on the way back. But we are going to miss him a lot, and I do think his life is evidence that division's not the way to make progress in this country. And it's not the way to make progress
Amen.
In agriculture as well.
We're also going to reset your clock here. This was important for you to say.
Well,
no, please.
I don't want to do that.
No. I want to make sure that you, this was important. Yeah,
but
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Secretary Vilsack, I want to thank you for the recent announcement of $35 million for wildfire mitigation in Colorado's Front Range as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. As you know, and I know you know this well because of how much time you've spent in the West, in both terms here, Colorado and the West continue to experience record-shattering wildfires that threaten landscapes, safety, and frankly, our way of life. And it's February now, and active wildfires are already burning in Colorado today, this week. We're expecting a rough fire season, and we're hearing that our no staff are available in some of Colorado's national forests for fuel reduction work, NEPA execution, or to help plan projects, both small and landscape scale. That's obviously, I know, unacceptable to you. It's unacceptable to us. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the Forest Service is planning to address these staffing shortages on our forests and prepare for the upcoming fire season.
Senator, I'll be happy to look at that particular forest. It surprises me because we have added significant numbers to the Forest Service. Candidly, right now, we are a bit concerned with a lack of a budget on whether or not we'll be able to retain many of those who fight those fires, absent a budget and absent a firefighter fix for the pay. We're going to see a lot of those folks leave. Yeah. So that's a big concern right now. We have, as I say, we have streamlined the process for hiring, and we've reached out and expanded significantly the outreach, and we have added a significant number of people.
We will work with your team on that to get them the specific information, the specific for us. I agree completely with your characterization of what you guys have done in the broader Forest Service. I also should mention, I should have mentioned at the outset, had the opportunity yesterday to meet with a group of federal wildland firefighters in my office again. And, you know, they reminded me this is a battle you've been in for a long time. It's a battle we've been in for a long time. Just to get these folks a decent paycheck, just to get these folks decent mental health care, you know, access to education and professional development and housing, which in Colorado has become virtually, throughout the West, has become virtually impossible. As you know, we've done some good work with the agency in the state where the Department of Agriculture has very graciously done land swaps with local communities to be able to try to create some housing, but we're way behind. And I agree with you. We are going to be in a crisis here because the next generation of firefighters is not going to come from nowhere. And the people they need to train them are the ones that we're losing right now. Out of respect for my colleague from Illinois, I'm going to spare the Secretary my last two questions since you gave me some more time, Madam Secretary, and I'll submit them for the record. But
you need a judge.
What?
You need a judge.
I don't need a judge. I don't even need a judge. I'm just doing it out of the goodness of my heart. But I will say, as closing, that I deeply appreciate what you said about our need to staff on the forestry and the salary issues continue to be ones that make it impossible for the agency to be able to staff its field offices adequately. That's not because nobody's tried. It's because we don't have the budget you're talking about, and we haven't increased the salaries in a way that'll be competitive. But I'll send you a question about that too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much. Actually, Senator Braun had come in and said, "Can I go next?" And he was the only Republican on this. I said, "Sure." And now Senator Highsmith is here. So we go back with regular order, or do we? What do we? All right, we will go back with regular order. So, all right, Senator Highsmith.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Bozeman, for all you've done. And I certainly appreciate the Secretary being here and have enjoyed our years that we've had the opportunity to work together. During the recess, I, in 3 days, put 1,000 miles on my car going up and down Mississippi, looking at different things. And we have a very serious problem brewing in Mississippi right now. So I was so excited that this is falling on today because we truly need help. And it's the southern pine beetle, which is by far the most destructive forest pest in the southern United States, as you're well aware. But my goal today is one to make you aware of the issue because it is so serious. You know, so many people look at that stand of trees as their kids' college savings fund. So many people look at that stand of trees as their retirement. And I just wanted to make you aware of this today and see if I could get some help with you in the department to try to help me address this because it is truly critical. Mississippi suffered a historic drought last year. And at one point, all 82 Mississippi counties were in a D3 extreme drought or worse, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. Prolonged drought stresses trees, especially pine trees, and it stressed pine tree is a ringing dinner bell for the pine beetle. All this to say, Mississippi is experiencing a major southern pine beetle outbreak, and private forest landowners across the state are devastated. Here are a few stats from the most recent report prepared by the U.S. Forest Service Southern Research Station and the Mississippi Forestry Commission. Nearly 80,000 acres of pine mortality. I've never seen anything like it driving just down the side of the road, and we've removed several from my mom's yard because these trees are also in neighborhoods falling on houses. But over 12.5 million dead trees, we call them widow makers in Mississippi. Conservative economic impact estimates indicate $96 million in lost timber, which affects so many things, including the sawmills and everything else. But the Mississippi Forestry Commission has also reported 230 fires across 9,000 acres, and foresters expect all of these problems to get worse as we're going into the spring season. Now is the time for action. It's time to respond to infestations and, importantly, prevent further outbreak, because that is so sensitive. I understand the USDA's Farm Service Agency's Emergency Forest Restoration Program, or the EFRP, provides cost share assistance to private landowners to carry out emergency measures to restore forest following national disasters. Drought and insect infestations are eligible disasters under EFRP, and a commercial thinning, removal of damaged trees, fire breaks, and prescribed burning, all of which happen to be helpful activities in combating the southern pine beetle, are also eligible practices. So EFRP sounds like a viable option for landowners in Mississippi, but I have heard some challenges and concerns about the program, such as the amount of time that it takes to receive cost share payments following the disaster. Some landowners need financing up front to carry out emergency measures, and without it, they often never take action. Only the FSA National Office, not FSA County Office committees, can authorize this EFRP for drought and insect infestations, which makes getting that authorization potentially more time-consuming as well. So my question to you, Mr. Secretary, are there ways USDA and our Congress can improve the overall quality of assistance provided through EFRP?
I think the answer to your question is yes. There is a concern, I think, about transitioning it back to the county because then it's difficult to keep track of the resources that are being allocated county to county. That's why it has to sort of funnel up to the national office. But certainly we can look for ways in which we can streamline that process. We can also, I think, look and should be looking at a way in which we can perhaps adjust the cost share issue in terms of advance payments so that work isn't delayed. I think those are two things that we ought to be doing.
Fantastic. And will you help ensure that any required authorization by the FSA National Office to respond to Mississippi's pine beetle outbreak happens in an expeditious manner? Because we're really in trouble here.
I understand. Yes.
I can count on you to do that. Wonderful. Will you and the department work with me going forward to try and help address the challenges faced by many landowners in Mississippi and throughout the South as well?
Well, will you get me a budget, Senator?
Be glad to. We're going to work real hard to do that.
That's great.
Because this is critical, and we're getting flooded with calls about this. Of course, I work with you as former Ag Commissioner, and
I'm very familiar with the pine bark beetle because this is something that obviously devastated the West. So it's a very serious issue. And
well, I so appreciate your willingness to help.
Thank you very much. Senator Jill Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate you very much. I have a line of questioning about the definition of nutrition dense. You know that we're in the middle of a compromise as to whether we're going to have a pilot program about nutrient dense foods. But under the dietary guidelines, whole milk, for example, is not considered nutritionally dense. If this appropriations rider were to pass tomorrow, how would you define nutrient-dense foods? For example, would you draw the line at nutrient content between a flavored yogurt and a dessert? Would the states or the USDA be in charge of creating the definition of nutrient-dense? What would the process to determine which foods are in and out would be based on USDA guidance? Based on your guidance today on what is nutrient dense, or do you create new ones? And then much more broadly, what's the impact going to be on retailers? How would this type of policy impact retailers? Will it make it harder for retailers to be able to use the SNAP program? And what's the impact on consumer choice and dignity? Would you agree that investing more in nutrition education could be a better way to address some of the root causes of diet-related diseases?
I'll try to answer.
I'm giving you all the questions so you answer the parts that make sense to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think obviously Congress has to direct us to do this. If you do, there may be parameters that you put around it. If you don't put parameters around it, we would obviously look for a partner in a state or states, depending upon what you tell us to do, that would be willing to work with this, because the states administer the SNAP program. We don't, in a sense, administer the day-to-day activities of the SNAP. There are a couple of states that have looked at this, and I think they've looked at it in a very tailored way. I don't think we have many of the answers to the questions that you raised, which is why you have a pilot, to find out whether or not a system like this does work or doesn't. Does it create serious IT issues at the grocery store or not? Does it create the stigma or not? In terms of the definition of nutrient dense, we would probably let the science, the nutrition science, drive that, as we would the dietary guidelines, so that we would have some scientific basis for the determination. And the structure, I think, would be also dependent on the capacity of an individual state to administer the program. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions about this. I would say that we have found that incentives work effectively, as the chairwoman understands and appreciates with her advocacy for the Double Bucks program, and that I think Gus Schumacher and others started, that's now part of the GusNIP program. That's certainly a successful program, and increasing the nutrition ed aspect of SNAP, I think, is always important. We established a new nutrition team at USDA in the SNAP program for that express purpose of trying to figure out how to better educate people about the utilization of the SNAP dollars in an effective way to promote nutrition. I think I've touched on most of the questions.
about the funding needs for nutrition education if we did add something with regard to that? You mentioned the GusNIP program and their impact on improving nutrition security.
Well, I think if you had an opportunity to increase the financing for GusNIP, you would find a significant audience for that. How do I know that? Well, because you did that in the pandemic assistance bills that you passed. And as a result, we saw a fairly significant uptake in GusNIP. We also saw a particular interest in the prescription produce effort, where we're working with pediatricians, looking at chronic disease situations, and instead of prescribing a drug, they prescribe fruits and vegetables as a way of dealing with chronic disease opportunities. So anything you do in that space is going to be beneficial. It's going to increase our knowledge base, and I think it's going to help us formulate better policies to advance nutrition.
Thank you. You stated for the record on the House Agriculture Committee hearing that your department is working hand in hand with the government of Puerto Rico to facilitate a transition to the SNAP program. In your view, what would you say Puerto Rico and the USDA are in a position to eventually have the proper infrastructure to allow Puerto Ricans access to SNAP?
Well, we are working very, very closely with Puerto Rico. The challenge is that they need to make sure that they have the administrative foundation to administer the program so that when people apply, they get benefits quickly. When they are no longer qualified, they are essentially transitioned off the program. There's an awful lot of work that has to be done in setting up the technology and the staffing of this effort. So we've been working very closely with the governor. I traveled to Puerto Rico, talked to him specifically about this. I think it's not a matter, unfortunately, of weeks or months, but I think it is certainly in the foreseeable future. The expectation and the goal is to actually transition to SNAP. And in the meantime,
USDA did publish a feasibility study where it concluded that Puerto Rico is ready to transition from NAP to SNAP. Is that your position?
It's my position that we're working closely with them to make sure that they have their ducks in line, because the worst thing that can happen would be for the transition to take place, for them not to be able to administer it properly. There would be, I think, significant chaos, and a lot of families would be hurt.
I also want to address national security. Obviously, our farmers are as vulnerable as any other businesses in America, especially when they don't have strong data protections and don't have cybersecurity of their data and their information. But moreover, something that Senator Marshall and I have been working on, a One Health proposal where we create a commission of USDA plus CIA, NSA, DOD, HHS to really prevent the next pandemic. Have you had the opportunity to work with any of the other agencies on pandemic preparedness and being able to make recommendations about collaborating to share data in advance so that we can protect our country from the next pandemic?
There is a White House-led effort at which USDA is involved, and most recently they had either today or sometime this week, they're having a tabletop exercise on that very subject.
Absolutely. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the Ag Committee. Continue to appreciate your service to this country. My first question, let's go back to Prop 12. I appreciate your answers before. As you know, California's Proposition 12 is another costly regulation. It would seem to me that if you're a larger company, that you could overcome these hurdles a little bit easier than a small packer could. In the pork industry, we see a company like Smithfield, which dominates 25% of the packing, and they're able to overcome all these regulations. They're big enough that they can handle other regulations, that the overregulation continues to lead to consolidation of industries, no more well seen than in the packing industry. What effect do you think Prop 12 has on independent pork producers who can't afford to comply, and is this going to drive further consolidation?
I think this is the reason why we have invested in expanded processing capacity at the local level, Senator. Yeah. Between our efforts to expand market and additional processing, nearly 400 projects have been funded, and we expect more to be funded in the next several months. This is part of building out a local and regional food system so that you're not at the whim of a handful of large-scale facilities or at the whim of a policy that you have a hard time complying with.
Thank you. Should Congress act to prevent the proliferation of laws like Prop 12 across the country?
You know, I think you got to provide some clarity and consistency. Having said that, I don't envy your capacity to do it. It's not going to be easy to craft that.
Thank you. To your point earlier, though, it's hard to have one producer to comply with 50 different states on how we're supposed to raise a heifer in Kansas. So let's talk about disaster assistance for a second. Obviously, Kansas coming off back-to-back years of drought, and we've had to apply for more disaster assistance. And we probably got more complaints about the response and the rollout of this latest round of disaster assistance than any other one issue in the last several years. Specifically, we were seeing some small absentee landowners were getting disaster assistance at a greater per acre rate than our full-time farmer families were. And this progressive way of doing this seems to be very complicated. It seemed to be very slow. I would ask you to consider abandoning this progressive payment factor in the future.
Senator, it's interesting because I'm looking at the numbers for Kansas. 45,132 of your producers got more money as a result of this progressive factor. 10,217 got less. So 82% of your producers actually benefited from this effort. Having said that, the way to avoid this, Senator, is very simple. Provide the resources fully and completely for the disaster. It was a $10 to $12 billion disaster. We told Congress that. You all gave us a little over $3 billion.
We actually gave you $3.7 billion, which I think was more than adequate to cover the situation. I think it's unfair to punish those just because they have more acres. Let's move on to the next question here. Okay, let's go talk about the Packers and Stockyards Act. I'm not sure if we've got to cover that topic today yet. In June of 2021, USDA stated, and I quote, "The USDA will propose a rule to clarify that parties do not need to demonstrate harm to competition in order to bring an action," end of quote, under certain provisions of the Packers and Stockyards Act. This rule is now at the Office of Management and Budget for final review before it's proposed. I point out that 8 federal appeals courts have already affirmed that the Packers and Stockyard Act requires a person to demonstrate harm to competition. Certainly, we have over 60 livestock organizations nationwide that oppose this rule because it hurts their livestock producers. So here's the question. Is it still the position of the USDA that you can implement a rule that would be a blatant violation of circuit court precedent by not requiring harm to competition to bring an action under the Packers and Stockyards Act?
Well, the rule itself hasn't been finalized, Senator. So I think obviously we have to take into consideration any litigative risk associated with the rule in crafting it. I think you're going to see more activity from Packers and Stockyards before that rule is available for folks to look at. I think there's still work that we need to do on the poultry tournament system. I think there's more work we have to do to avoid discrimination and retaliation to producers, and I think you'll see those rules coming forward relatively soon. I think there's still work to be done, and we're continuing to do work on the rule that you mentioned. And I think it is obviously appropriate for us to craft it in a way which we believe responds to any of the concerns that courts have raised in the past.
I'm digesting that answer. So you don't feel that if it has this harm to competition, it's almost a double negative on me here. Do you think it's in violation of the circuit court precedent by not requiring harm to competition to bring an action under the Packers and Stockyards Act?
I think it's incumbent upon us to craft it in a way that responds to whatever concerns have been raised by courts in the past to avoid those problems, and at the same time to provide a more balanced marketplace for producers and
thank you.
Integrators.
Thank you. I think I would just close by making a comment that if we want to guarantee affordable food, access to affordable food for everybody, we're spending plenty of money on the back end, but I'm concerned as we work on a farm bill going forward that we're not spending enough money on the front end to make sure that our farmers are able to plant next year's crop. That's not really a question, it's just a statement. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Thank you for your patience, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. Congratulations on Caitlin Clark.
She's something. I'm not sure I'd pay $400, but I might. She might be worth it. She is one hell of a player.
So I'm going to ask you a question that starts with a part of it that doesn't sound like it belongs in this committee. But I wanted to talk to you about the environment and particularly about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not a new phenomenon, but it's a recurring and threatening phenomena where some 4,000 to 8,000 square miles of Gulf of Mexico dies because of the runoff primarily from the Mississippi River. And that runoff is chemicals, nutrients, animal waste, sewage, and the like. It has a dramatic impact on the Gulf of Mexico, on weather patterns, and a lot of other things. I know enough about you personally that you care about things like this. I do too. And they trace the origin of many of those elements of runoff to our states, Illinois and Iowa. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think about our current farm programs and whether they are addressing this and whether there are things that we need to be doing in the future? I think about Illinois situation. We're kind of blessed to have similar states we're from a farm viewpoint. We're about number 4 in the nation in terms of agriculture production, pretty big state. But we rank 37th in the nation when it comes to participation in the major conservation programs, soil conservation programs that might avoid some of this runoff. What are we missing? What do we need to do? If you think it's a problem, how would you address it?
Well, I think first of all, the resources that you all have provided under the Inflation Reduction Act provide some ammunition to begin to address this issue in a more meaningful way. We've expanded the number of cooperative groups that are reaching out to farmers to encourage them to participate in basic conservation that could potentially significantly reduce the need. We're also funding research, Senator. I think we know that we over-apply some of these nutrients. And with precision agriculture, I think we will do a better job of understanding which acre of land actually needs nutrition and which do not. I've been told that perhaps as many as 30% of our corn acres in Iowa and Illinois may not require any fertilizer at all. So we would see a reduction in the use of that. We have resources that have been applied from the CCC that we're utilizing to create alternatives to the fertilizers. So we're going to look at different ways to fertilize the land. We have our climate smart agricultural practices and effort where we're trying to encourage climate smart practices by paying farmers to embrace them, provide a market premium for what they raise sustainably. That should also have an impact. So if you if you expand conservation, if you reduce the level of fertilizer being applied, if you create financial incentives for farmers to embrace climate smart practices, and you do research that allows you to be more precise, I think the combination of those factors will significantly over time reduce the risk of the dead zone continuing to expand at the rate it is.
I know I'm stepping into a minefield here, but the initial statistics which you offered earlier about ownership of farmland and the size of the farms for average farmers and income and such suggest that many of the key decisions on participating in these programs are being made by investors rather than actual farmers on the land. In that situation, do we have the right incentives in place for these investors to be part of these programs?
I think we do, because the science would say that if you invest in conservation, you improve the productive value of the soil. You also have water quality improvements. So it's in the long-term best interest of a landowner to have conservation practices embraced because it will increase the value and productive capacity of that farm over time.
I recently took a flight last week to Africa, and on a Delta Airlines plane, and they were making it clear to all of their passengers that they're taking this global warming and climate change seriously, and they want to be zero carbon producers in a matter of just 10 or 20 years, to the point where they offered, in where I was sitting, I had a nice seat, a toothbrush, which is not unusual, but it made a point of telling me it had a wooden handle on it, less plastic. So it appears that the private sector in this country, at least some parts of it, are taking very seriously climate change and changing the way they're going to do business in the future. What do you think we need to do to bring the farming sector into that mindset?
Well, there are 141 projects that we're funding through resources from the CCC, Senator, encouraging in 50 states climate smart practices to be embraced by farmers. It involves, as I say, 141 contracts. Those contracts involve well over 100 commodities and over 205 climate smart practices. The system basically pays farmers and sends them to embrace climate smart practices, and then is linking them up to markets that will essentially provide a reward, if you will, a value-added proposition for farmers. Secondly, by being able to measure, quantify, and verify the results of that climate smart practice, we're helping to create the opportunity for that same farm to generate an ecosystem market credit, which can generate more income from the farm. And then finally, many of the projects involve the conversion of agricultural waste, which is another answer to your dead zone question. If you could actually begin to take manure instead of over applying it on land, you can create it as a feedstock for one of those bioproducts. It could be sustainable aviation fuel. It could be a variety of other bioproducts. You've created not only a new income source and a new commodity for that farmer, you've also created jobs in rural communities.
Thanks for your service. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. We'll talk about SNAP for a second, Mr. Secretary. Considering roughly 80% of the Farm Bill is for SNAP spending, we need to rein in fraudulent activity and ensure food assistance goes to those who truly need it most. I think we all agree with that. I hope we do. I know that states directly administer SNAP, but USDA oversees the program. Could requiring the asset test in states help address fraud in SNAP?
I think what would be best to do at this point, Senator, is for us to get back to regular order in terms of the process for people qualifying and staying on SNAP. During the pandemic, there were essentially a waiver of that process, including constant interviews and touching base with folks. Getting back to regular order, I think, would be significant, and that's why we've sent letters to governors in a number of states encouraging them to get back on track.
What do you think, what additional information does the USDA need to help address, the root cause of the fraud? Anything else that we need to make it easier to catch them?
Well, I think we've made some significant steps in that regard, and I think probably what I need to do, Senator, is I need to give you your team a full briefing of the steps that we've taken, given your interest in this. I think sometimes the people see the error rate and they think that represents fraud. Sometimes the error rate is actually overpaying, and sometimes it's underpaying. So we want to make sure that we're calculating the benefits properly and making sure people get, as you say, the assistance that they need.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll get my staff to get in touch with you so we can kind of work on this together. I've got a question on trade. The U.S. has historically been strong on agriculture exports, but due to President Biden's economy, U.S. agriculture trade has a trade deficit of over $30 billion due to rising imports and lack of new market access. Can you share to us how the USDA is working with U.S. trade representatives to underscore the need for a proactive approach so that our competitors do not continue to gain market share and capture opportunities that would have otherwise been ours?
Well, I think you have to look at what's driving the import issue. What's driving it in large part are horticulture and sugar, which are two areas. I would also say that sometimes there's a tendency, Senator, to focus solely on trade agreements and not understand that there's work below that process that matters. We've calculated roughly $20 billion of trade wins that have occurred in the last couple of years. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Mexico and potato access, Japan with increased beef quota, India expanding access to apples, the Philippines expanded access to pork, Egypt expanded access to poultry. There's a substantial number of things that have occurred that don't get the headlines, but that actually result in increased trade. And the reality is we have a very much stronger economy than the rest of the world has. When China's economy suffers, that obviously has an impact and effect on exports as well. So it's a combination of factors. Strong American dollar. I mean, do we want a weak dollar? I don't know. Do we want to weaken the American economy so people aren't buying stuff? I don't know. We're going to continue to work on this. And I would say, as far as trade agreements are concerned, the reality is, unless there's, maybe you think you can pass trade promotion authority, I haven't seen that happen here in this body. Yeah. And until it does, it becomes very difficult for us to negotiate a trade agreement when the people we're negotiating with believe that there are 535 folks, yourself included, that could renegotiate the deal. It's hard to have a trade agreement without trade promotion authority.
Let's talk a little bit about poultry. Yesterday, the USDA FSIS extended the time-limited trial for pork processing facilities, allowing them to continue operating at a higher line speeds. As of now, the poultry industry's line speeds waivers are set to expire at the end of March. Can you say whether the USDA plans to extend the waivers?
I think we will see an extension of this because we want to make sure we get the right information about whether or not line speeds actually do relate to increased injury, worker injury or worker safety. That's the whole purpose of this, is to try to find out what the facts are. We need to structure these studies in a way that gives us the information. I'm not interested in making decisions on this until I have all the facts. I don't have all the facts yet.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, our farmers in Alabama and across the country are struggling to survive. And I know you've met with a lot of them, and you've probably heard from a lot of them, especially our family farms. You know, net farm income has fallen $70 billion since 2022. And that's the fastest and largest decline in U.S. farm profitability over a 2-year period of time. Overall input costs are up $27 billion since 2021 and up over $100 billion since the last farm bill, driven by rapidly rising interest rates, which we can't control, record high labor costs, if you can find labor, and the inflationary pressure across all other farm inputs. Our farmers are struggling to keep up with the ever-evolving bureaucratic environment that requires them to hire lawyers and lobbyists to ensure compliance with the endless red tape up here in Washington forces them to do. These are additional costs that they really can't bear, contributing to a further consolidation in the ag industry. Why do you think that farmers are leaving the industry and the next generation doesn't want to keep farming? I mean, do you have any answer to that for our farmers?
I have several answers, I think. One is that there's been a focus on production. We're talking about a commodity-based system. We've encouraged farmers to produce. We've suggested you got to get big or get out. That's been suggested. What we need to do, in my view, is to create alternative market opportunities for those small and mid-sized producers so that they aren't necessarily competing solely and completely in a commodity-based market, which is not really designed for them. That's why it's important to have local and regional food systems. That's why it's important to invest in renewable energy and create opportunities for that energy to be sold to the local co-op. That's why it's important to have climate-smart agriculture so that you get a value-added proposition. It's why it's important for us to create new products like sustainable aviation fuel that can create new commodities with agricultural waste. There's a multitude of things that we can and are doing to basically create a better opportunity in the future.
What I just don't want to see is what's going on in Europe, you know, with all the farmers driving their tractors up and down the roads.
Completely different approach.
I understand that, but it's all about regulations at the end of the day. And the farmers in Alabama, you know, it seemed like every other phone call I get is about something different that they're having to face in terms of whether it's climate change or whether it's high cost of fertilizer, all the things that are coming at them at once, and the prices aren't there, and they can't make a profit. And if we lose our farmers, we are in bad trouble. So I just want to let you carry that on from people in Alabama. It's tough times for them, and just hopefully this year there's a good crop and everything works a lot better than what it has. Thank you.
Senator Fetterman. Yes.
Actually, I defer to the gentleman from Iowa to go.
Well, that's very nice. Senator Grassley.
Before I would address my first question, I'd speak to the entire committee, of which there's only 3 of us here now, but I think we're really missing a real good opportunity to make sure that farmers have the long view on, pardon me, the long view on agricultural policy by not having a 5-year farm bill, and just would like to emphasize the importance of getting that done yet this year. Say, I know, Secretary Vilsack, that you are doing a lot to enhance the enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act, and I don't know the status of that, and I know you had a discussion with Senator Marshall on it, but it came up that there was some decisions by circuit courts that you had to take into consideration. Does that enhance your ability to do stronger enforcement or weaken your opportunity to do stronger enforcement?
Well, I think it informs our ability to try to figure out how we can create a leveler playing field for the producer, which I know you want, and at the same time withstand any litigative challenge that may come to the rules. Having said that, there are a series of Packers and Stockyard rules that we're in the process of completing. We've completed the transparency rule, where we're asking folks to provide producers a bit more information about who they're doing business with. We're very close to getting the retaliation and discrimination rule out in final form that essentially says you can't discriminate or retaliate against a producer when he or she exercises her rights. There's a poultry tournament system rule that is in the process. There's also a cattle discovery rule that's in the process. So there's a series of rules that we're looking at. And the goal here, Senator, is to level the playing field, just to provide a balance.
Of all the different rules that you're trying to write, do these circuit court opinions affect every one of those rules, or just some of them?
Just one.
Just one?
Yes, sir.
And then could you characterize for me if you think that ruling causes you to do less than what you'd like to do as Secretary of Agriculture to make sure the act is effective, or it enhances it?
Well, I think it's a challenge for us to figure out how to do what needs to get done, but to do it in a way that doesn't create a litigative challenge, a successful litigative challenge.
Well, you've informed me well on that, and thank you. Maybe very generally, could you speak about your role, and your role isn't the primary role in regard to this special fuel for airplanes that grain farmers have a big interest in, but your role in that, and then can we preserve feedstocks being primarily used there without diluting it? Like I heard some people want to dilute it.
I think we have 2 roles at USDA with reference to sustainable aviation fuel. One is to advocate for a rule that allows a broad array of feedstocks, including the traditional feedstocks that are used for biofuels, to qualify for the tax credits and for the incentives, so that it's financially feasible to use ethanol, for example. That's part of my responsibility, is to articulate the need, the science behind that. I think we've been successful in getting the GREET model incorporated in this process. I think we're now in the process of talking about climate smart agriculture, and we're going to continue to pound the table on that. The second responsibility is for USDA to also provide the science and the data behind the availability of feedstock, the logistics for the supply chain, how you can accelerate adoption and commercialization. I was in Georgia recently at the first commercial scale plant. We need to get to 36 billion gallons. That plant was a 10 million gallon plant. So obviously we have to accelerate dramatically the commercialization and availability. So we need to figure out the tools that we can use at USDA, our loan programs and so forth, to try to accelerate that.
Could you characterize for me the advice you've been doing in this, how it's been received by those that have to make the final decision?
Well, I think they appreciate the fact that that I'm a strong advocate and that our team at USDA is very thoughtful and provides the scientific data to back up what it is we're saying. We're not just advocating because it would be good for farmers. We're advocating because the science supports it. And I think as a result, a number of folks who may have been a bit skeptical of the GREET model, for example, now embrace the GREET model. And we're in the process of educating them about climate smart agriculture so they understand the cover crops and energy and efficient fertilizer and no-till, things of that nature, you can calculate the benefits of those, and that should be incorporated in the matrix and in the calculation.
Yeah. Let me end with a position or a feeling I have about this, that there seems to be an inconsistency from, I think, primarily environmental groups, and if I'm wrong on this, you can correct me, but they want to clean up the pollution that airplanes put into the environment, and yet if you just use, if you don't use ethanol and grain as input into that, then you aren't going to have enough fuel made by all the other sources you can use. And so it seems to me that we ought to be on the same wavelength, environmentalists with farmers, trying to provide so we have an adequate amount.
Well, I would agree with that, and I would add a point, which is if you can't domestically produce the feedstocks for this fuel, then you're going to have to import them. So why would we do that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your courtesy. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. By the way, are you going to be the longest-serving Secretary of Agriculture we've ever had pretty soon?
I think so.
I am not.
You're not?
No.
But you will be.
Big Jim Tama Wilson from Tama, Iowa.
Yeah.
Served 15 years and 11 months.
We all saw the Jeopardy question.
Oh, my goodness.
Did you answer it, Senator?
No.
Correctly?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
No, that's one of the few ones I could actually answer.
All right. Senator Fetterman, welcome.
Thank you. Oh, my goodness. There we go. So, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. And now, I meet with a lot of farmers from my state, which happens to be Pennsylvania, and they have, and it is actually our top business in Pennsylvania. I'm sure you know that. So, and there are things that come up that may not be perfectly germane to certain kinds of discussions here, but I just really want to bring about some of these issues that I hear a lot about when I meet with the trade groups and other farmers all across. And one of the same kind of argument is that they need to have support in order to remain in business and to be profitable. And they're under siege by a lot of different things. And one thing I wanted to talk about now, and I hear this again and again, is concerns, and I share those concerns, is foreign companies, or excuse me, foreign countries owning our land. Is that an issue that you might be concerned with?
It's roughly 3% or so of the agricultural land is owned by foreign interests, Senator. Now, the challenge is whether or not we have an accurate read on that based on the system, which is an honor system, where folks are supposed to report if they are a foreign owner. Some folks do, some folks may not.
So is So you don't believe it's concern because it's 3%?
Well, you look at the people that it's Canadians, it's UK, it's Brits, it's folks from Holland. Oftentimes people talk about this in terms of China. China is 1/10 of 1% of that amount.
Yeah, I believe they're the 10th. But even though they're 10th in terms of ownership, but they effectively own about half the size of Rhode Island.
Well, my concern about China is twofold. One is the location of whatever they own, whether it represents a security issue. We found recently the desire to buy land that was close to a defense installation. I have concerns about that. China is also our number one ag customer from an export perspective. And when I was meeting with the agriculture minister, he inquired about certain laws that were being passed in the United States, which means that they are sensitive to what they're hearing. And the question is whether or not that will impact their buying decisions and whether that matters to anybody on the Ag Committee or anybody in the Congress.
Oh, to your knowledge, do American farmers or companies, are they buying Chinese land?
No.
Why not?
China doesn't provide that.
Yeah, they don't allow
and
that.
state.
Oh, well, yeah. So if they don't allow us and we allow them, that doesn't seem.
Well, states basically can pass laws to prevent foreign ownership, and many states have done that.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on. But again, and again, I'm not really concerned that Canada owns a lot. They have some of that, or I'm not really worried that Denmark might. But again, China has been very clear that it is certainly not an ally, and it's certainly in a kind of category. And now they don't even allow us to have that kind of same situation in their nation. And I think it's a concern, and I hear that a lot in my state. And then now moving back to another thing is SNAP. Now, the Republican side, especially the ones in the House, now they really want to make that a target. And to me, I think it's critical about that. And given my position and chairman of the subcommittee or whatever, I would do anything legally that I can do to block any legislation if they try to cut SNAP or to weaponize that or do anything to the Thrifty Food Plan. And now in 2018, the Farm Bill authorized in a very bipartisan way. The USDA is regularly reevaluating the Thrifty Food Plan. So can you explain a cost-neutral Thrifty Food Plan that would be a cut to the benefits?
Well, it would impact and affect the level of benefits in the future and would result in less benefit over the long term. It wouldn't necessarily cut the benefit today, but it would certainly result in a lower benefit in the future.
Well, I just really want to be clear that to me that's untouchable, and SNAP is, I think, in my mind, sacred to people that are hungry in our nation. Now, speaking of other foods and anything, my farmers feel like they're under siege by these plant-based so-called plant milks and that as well. Now, so I don't believe that you should count something that is made out of oats or almonds or whatever as milk. I mean, they can make whatever those products as you want, but it to me is impacting the bottom line for our dairy farmers here in my state, and I suspect all across the nation. What are your just personal thoughts on labeling plant milk when it's not really anything to do with milk?
Well, I think the challenge here is that the term milk has a certain brand associated with it in terms of nutrition. I think people believe that milk is a very nutritional food. So anybody who uses the term milk ought to be able to establish the nutritional value of whatever it is that they're trying to sell. And oftentimes what you find with those alternatives is that they don't match the nutritional value of milk. And therefore, in my view, they ought not to be able to use that term.
Okay. Madam Chairwoman, I mean, maybe for 90 seconds perhaps? Or?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
So it pains me to agree with Governor DeSantis on anything, but I will, that he is opposed to lab meat. And I find that really kind of very unattractive, basically. And now that's another challenge as well, too. And now that's one more product or movement or whatever that is going to impact our farmers that raise beef or other kinds of chickens. So really, is that really can you be calling that actual meat, or is that, what kind of category is that kind of a thing?
Well, I think we are currently grappling with this issue right now in terms of labeling. What do you call it? If the biological process is actually equivalent to what takes place with livestock, the argument is that it ought to be able to be called meat. However, consumers, I think, need to understand and appreciate the differentiation between cell-cultured meat and livestock that's produced on the farm. And that's what we're dealing with now, trying to figure out how do you distinguish so that when consumers make the choice, they know what they're buying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Luddite or anything like that, but I find that very different. I think I would, but I do think it is going to have another impact and a challenge for our farmers. But anyways.
Well, thank you very much. Important questions here on labeling that I know the department's got to deal with in a number of areas. So thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary, thanks for being here and for your work on behalf of our great farmers and ranchers across the country. My colleague our colleague from Pennsylvania just mentioned SNAP. And in the baseline for the Farm Bill, which is $1.5 trillion, the SNAP baseline is going from about 600 and some billion to about 1.25 trillion. So that's doubling. Is there any other program in the Farm Bill where the baseline is going up that much?
Well, there may be a smaller program where you're seeing an increase, but probably not.
Yeah. So I just referenced that in terms of his concerns about a cut. Last I checked, it's about doubling. So I don't understand where somebody would talk about a cut. I want to bring up two programs that I think are fundamentally vital for farmers and ranchers across this country in terms of production agriculture. And it won't surprise you when I tell you the first one is crop insurance, and the second is the countercyclical safety net. I think these are fundamental to our system of agriculture. We have an amazing system of agriculture in this country. It's still largely small businesses, family-based businesses, family-based farms and ranches across this country. When you look across other industries, and I welcome some comments on this if you'd like, but we see concentration over and over and over again in these other industries. But in farming, we don't have that. We still have this amazingly diverse system of farming and ranching of largely family-based small businesses. And I think that's incredibly important for this nation, fundamentally important for this nation. I think sometimes it gets taken for granted. And I think we better be really, really careful not to take it for granted, because we have the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world. And our not only do Americans across the board, they're able to spend less of their budget than in other developed countries because of what our farmers and ranchers do. So when we talk about a farm bill, it benefits every single American every single day because of what our farmers and ranchers are out there doing. And I know you believe that too. So when we talk about this farm bill, we got to get it right for production agriculture, because we can't take that amazing enterprise that we have, agriculture in this country, which is fundamental to our nation in so many ways, our national defense, everything. And that means crop insurance, the number one risk management tool. We got to get it right, which also reduces the need for ad hoc disaster programs, and the same with the ARC PLC. So when I ask you, do you support making sure that we update crop insurance so that it is affordable for our producers, that it's as fair as possible from state to state, and that they have access not only to crop insurance on their enterprise on a basis that they can afford, but also supplemental coverage options? Do you support that? And do you have ideas on how we can and should enhance it?
Senator, I think the fact that we have had new crop insurance policies established while I've been secretary, and we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of modifications to existing crop insurance policies, the establishment of a whole farm revenue protection, even a micro farm program, I think suggests that we understand and appreciate the importance of it. I would take a slight issue with one of the comments that you made. I think there is consolidation happening in agriculture. I'm not happy with the fact that in my professional life, we've lost 544,000 farms. Gone. Those are families that I suspect many of them would have loved to have been able to continue farming, but we're not able to now. Folks can tell me that it's all about regulations and taxes and so forth, which is what I hear all the time. But I think what has been missing from the conversation is market development, domestic market development, and alternative revenue streams for these farms. So as you talk about a farm bill that's focused on production agriculture, I would hope that we also understand the importance of local and regional food systems, understand the capacity to create additional revenue streams for these farms. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see consolidation.
Right. So we're making the same case. Now, we both may be talking about tools we think are important and additional tools, but we're making the same case. So we got a pretty great system, and we want to make sure that we sustain it, right? You just lamented the fact that we've lost some farms.
We want to make it better.
Right.
That's for sure.
And you would agree that crop insurance, I mean, that really starts with crop insurance, doesn't it? I'm not saying the other things you mentioned aren't important. I'm saying, isn't it? I mean, if you ask farmers across this country, what's the first thing they tell you they need? The number one thing that they think is most important in terms of risk management.
Well, there's no question that that's the answer, but the question is whether or not we have challenged ourselves to think anew and to think more broadly. Beyond, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do what you've outlined on crop insurance. Absolutely. But what I am suggesting is that if you just stop at that, that's all you do,
sure,
that's not enough.
Yeah, no, that's right. So then let's add the countercyclical safety net to that. Isn't it important that we do as good a job as we can on that and update that, including reference prices, to make sure it's relevant and reduce the need for ad hoc disaster programs?
So long as you're not damaging other opportunities that could create a chance for farmers to benefit from conservation practices, for example, to the extent that you're talking about doing reference prices at the expense of fill in the blank, SNAP, IRA, that's where I think you have some challenges, which is why I've suggested let's be more creative than that.
Can I ask the indulgence of the chair for maybe another minute at most two? Glad you brought it up. So conservation programs, would you agree, though, that they should be voluntary, they should be farmer-friendly, they should be not one-size-fits-all, and that we have good examples out there like EQIP and CSP and the RCPP and others that our farmers and ranchers tell us they do want more of?
Everything we've done has been consistent with that, Senator.
In the livestock area, well, I'm glad to hear that, because we listen to farmers all the time, and they do want some of these programs. They want more funding for the programs. I really think, again, emphasizing farmer-friendly being so important. You're from Iowa, so you know what I'm talking about. Cattlemen, how do we get more transparency and and they're doing well right now, but boy, they suffered for a long time before they got these markets. But they are doing better now, and I hope it continues for our cattle producers for a while. But how do we continue, and the concentration, I won't even go into all that on account of time, but what do we do to improve pricing, competition, and transparency?
Price discovery, greater transparency, more processing capacity at the local and regional level.
And you support our cattle contract library?
Absolutely. Well, we established it.
Thank you, Secretary. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We're going to move. We've got a number of members coming in now, so thank you, Senator. At this point, Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. I was glad to get the news a little while ago. I'm sure everybody here has it, that we looks like we may be avoiding a government shutdown. But here we are again, engaged in governing through brinksmanship, which is a terrible way to run anything, let alone the United States government. Included in the deal that was struck is ag, but obviously we'll see the text in a few days over the weekend and hopefully get these bills cleared next week. So as we think about this and the prospect of a government shutdown, if the Secretary could put into sharper focus for us and welcome Secretary Vilsack, as we think about this, I'm considering the implications of a lapse in funding that puts millions of hardworking families at risk, both those who run the small family farms that are the lifeblood of our rural economies and those who rely on vital food assistance programs. Secretary Vilsack, which consequences of a government shutdown at USDA keep you up at night as we work our way through this?
Senator, first of all, the farmer who can't get the loan, the farmer who won't be able to get the ARC and PLC payment, the farmer that won't be able to get the disaster assistance program, the farmer that won't be able to get the conservation contract signed, the SNAP recipient potentially that won't get the SNAP resources to be able to go to the grocery store, the WIC mom that won't get the benefits from the WIC program, the researcher who spent his or her life for the last several years doing some extraordinary research only to have the lab shut down during and millions of dollars of research lost. The Forest Service that wants to open up the forests so people can enjoy them but can't and won't. I mean, the list goes on.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that exhaustive list because it underscores how much is at stake beneath the games that Washington plays.
Senator, if I could just say one thing about this. Just the threat of a shutdown. This is the fourth time that we've had to spend staff time planning for a shutdown.
Right.
And interestingly enough, depending upon the timing of the shutdown, depends on who gets characterized and in what category in terms of the workforce. It is an extraordinary waste of time.
And resources.
Well, it's just maddening.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm going to change topics. You're well aware that child hunger is a serious issue in our country. Approximately 30 million students are eligible to receive free or reduced price school meals. However, over the summer months, they often don't have adequate access to meals. Hunger doesn't go on a vacation. How many students are reached by these summer lunch programs?
You want to know how many of the states that have agreed?
Yes.
21 million out of the 30 million or so that are eligible. There are 13 states that have yet to agree to participate in the program.
That's right, and sadly, my state of Georgia is one of those states. This summer meal gap is putting our most vulnerable children at greater risk of going hungry, struggling in school, and experiencing long-term health challenges.
1.1 million children in your state.
1.1 million. So state leaders in Georgia refuse to participate in this program. They say they don't need it. I don't know who they're talking about. I can tell you as a pastor, I can point to folks not far from my church who would benefit. How much money is Georgia leaving on the table that could be used to feed our kids?
So $138 million. That's not, but then you have to figure out how it rolls around in the economy. So you're talking about probably close to $500 million of economic activity that's lost.
Right. So $138 million, not to mention the economic impact on our state. Same thing with Medicaid expansion, a similar story. I appreciate your effort in standing up this new program. Appreciate all the hard work you all are doing over at USDA, and I hope you'll continue to encourage states like Georgia that have not opted in this year to do so next year. We have to continue to work until we close the summer meal gap and all of our children have equitable access to food. I want to change yet to another topic. Sections 22006 and 22006 007, I'll take credit for that last number, of the Inflation Reduction Act, which I fought hard to include with Senator Booker and the chair, provided $5.3 billion for economically distressed farmers and farmers who experience historical discrimination by USDA. It's been a joy to engage these farmers over the time of my early years and my tenure here in the Senate. When I think about that program, it's one of the reasons why I do this work. Every now and then you get a chance to do something that is transformational. I think of Lucius Abrams, who was one of the farmers in Georgia who had all of his USDA loans forgiven. I believe you know Lucius, and you know that this means he is no longer at risk of literally losing his farm. The last time you came before the committee, I asked about your outreach plan for eligible farmers to ensure they applied for assistance. That application window is now closed, so I'll ask you in my written questions about the outreach that you did. But now I'd like to talk about what happens next and when applicants might see assistance. When I talk to farmers in Georgia who have applied for this assistance, they tell me that they're trying to plan for the next planting season, and they need to know when they can expect assistance. What is your timeline for getting this financial assistance into the pockets of farmers?
By last count, there are nearly 60,000 applications that have been received. So now the administrators, the outside administrators, have got to go through the process of evaluating those applications. Our hope is that we get resources out the door sometime in the summer.
Sometime this summer. Very good. Thank you so very much. These farmers have had a long haul. This goes back over decades. The financial assistance is long overdue. I want to continue to strongly encourage you to swiftly roll out the rest of this funding so other distressed farmers can remain on their land and have the opportunity to grow another crop. Grateful for the work that USDA has been doing on this score.
There are an additional nearly 40,000 farmers that have received assistance under 22006.
That's correct. Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Braun, you're back with us. I was thinking as Secretary was talking about growing climate solutions and the work we've done together, and now it's in the department. So, Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that was a long journey. And imagine getting a bill like that through the U.S. Senate 92-8.
It was great. Senator Bozeman, thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, I want to talk about something. I'm still involved in farming to the extent you can. And by the way, John Tester, I think, still drives the tractor in his spare time. And other than things like WOTUS and maybe things out of your jurisdiction, I've, over the last 6 months to a year, heard a topic the farming community and farmers are worried about, and it would be foreign ownership of land. In its report that I have right here, the GAO made 6 recommendations that would help USDA modernize the AFITA process, make the most of the data it collects, and collaborate better with our national security agencies. Madam Chair, I'd like to submit this into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. According to the GAO, the current AFITA system is not meeting the mark to fully monitor foreign ownership and penalize non-filers. I have simple legislation, the AFITA Improvement Act, with John Tester, Senator Tester, as a co-lead, 14 Republicans, 9 Democrats on it, including Madam Chair. I believe that this bill is low-hanging fruit. It should be the next step that Congress takes in addressing the foreign ownership of agricultural land. Do you agree that this would be a good bill to get through the process?
Senator, it'd be a very fine bill to get through the process, but I don't think anybody should be fooled that this somehow is going to result in a significantly better system. And the reason I'm saying that is that we basically have today an honor system. We have a self-reporting system. And so if you are not an honorable person, you may decide not to report. And there are over 3,000 county recorder's offices where you could potentially file a deed and no one know about it. So unless there is some kind of central database, which I don't think folks are really excited about, of listing all of the real estate transactions that take place in this country, you've got an honor system. And if you're okay with an honor system, improving it, these are absolutely right things to do. But don't fool yourself into think that somehow this is going to result in a full and complete understanding of foreign ownership.
Did you look at the GAO's recommendations?
I understand. Yeah, absolutely. But they've got nothing to do. They really don't do much in terms of the self-reporting aspect of this issue.
So if the bill were amended to take care of self-reporting, would that be what you'd need to see to make it more effective?
That would be a way of ensuring that you actually were getting the information that you
that's
seek.
why we have hearings, to take a good bill and make it to where
but I'm telling you,
might be better. If that happened, would you be okay with what?
I'd be fine with it, but I'm telling you right now, you're going to find people not very excited about the notion of a national database where every real estate transaction that takes place in this country is going to be in the federal government's purview. But that's the problem with these issues is it's so easy to sort of demagogue them. I'm saying you do, but it's a self-reporting system. So if you don't want to report, you take your chances.
Well, I think it's something that we could probably do to where it wouldn't end up having to be a national database, to where you could find it and just preempt it in some fashion. So,
and make sure that when you're doing that if it's an LLC or an LLP, that you have the ability to look into and go deeper.
Because they can hide the true owner through that. That's true.
Then the question is, well, how much of an ownership interest are you concerned about? What if it's a 1% ownership interest? Is that?
Well, I think we ought to be smart enough in this body, with the help of a great agency, to get to the bottom of who is owning ground and not be deterred by the fact that it might be hard to do. I think that's what I'm after. I'll take that into consideration and see if we can work with you on the specifics to get that to where it would be a good product that you think that would work. So on another issue I hear a lot about would be Prop 12. That has probably got producers in many places in a quandary between what they're currently doing in their own operations and what they may have to do to be relevant in other markets. Hoosier farmers, I think, have been torn between the investment that they may have to make. Some may choose to do it in terms of things that are happening in California, maybe opportunities. But for many, it's an area of concern. And my concern is that you don't want to homogenize things across the country. There may be a good idea there. What do you think about what's happening along the lines of that, in terms of how it's got producers worried about if their investment's going to be irrelevant, because that might cascade across the country?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court, when it made its decision that this did not violate the Commerce Clause, didn't fully understand the hog market. Because I don't think hog producers have as much choice as the Supreme Court seemed to think they did in determining that this was not a violation of the Commerce Clause. The reality is this decision that's the Supreme Court has issued opens up the opportunity literally for all 50 states to do this in one form or another. So it could potentially be quite difficult for producers to understand precisely what to do and how to do it. The reaction that I'm having at USDA, the only thing we can do is to make sure that we're building out the local and regional food system so that producers who choose not to participate with large packing facilities that do business in California have an alternative.
Well, I think the concern has to be that we don't let one state be kind of a shadow regulator, that this place is going to reflexively, look at it and declare it the new standard. Not saying we're doing it. A lot of people are concerned about it. On the other hand, we don't want a good idea to be suppressed. So
that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's something that looks like it's going to be more out there than not. And a lot of this stuff has been originating there, sweeping across the country. And I think we got to be careful that it's not the tail wagging the dog.
Well, there are other issues also that intersect in this discussion that are also challenging.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you very much. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to our ranking member for this hearing. And Mr. Secretary, thank you and your team for being here today as well and the work that you've been doing. Madam Secretary, Madam Chair, I also want to say thank you to Brendan and Kyle for coming out to New Mexico. I appreciate them traveling across the country and taking time to see firsthand. They know what an acequia is now. I want to get them out there with some shovels, and they're going to clean one of these days.
Okay.
But we had them out there as well, and I hope they enjoyed it. I know they both got a little bit of chili.
I know they did.
So I apologize for whatever that may have done to them. But they got a little taste of New Mexico, so just thank you for that.
Well, so pleased to be able to support that.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. And Mr. Secretary, one issue I wanted to highlight is related to a study the USDA recently released highlighting the discrepancy in farm payments from Hispanic and non-Hispanic farmers. The study also showed that Hispanic farmers are more likely to be a financial risk than their counterparts. And I've been calling for more data on ethnic and racial disparities, and I was glad to finally see USDA release this report. And Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to ask if I have your continued commitment to make equity a priority at USDA.
Absolutely.
I can't thank you enough. And, you know, one of the most recent visits you had, you went out to New Mexico firsthand yourself, which I can't thank you enough, because it's one thing to be able to hear about what's happening on the ground. It's another thing to see it for yourself. And you took time to visit with some of those families who are devastated by what is our largest fire in our state's history. Now, as I've mentioned several times in committee, New Mexico is still recovering from this devastating fire back in 2022. And I appreciate the partnership between FEMA and USDA, some of which you addressed while you were there. But there's still some areas that need some attention, Mr. Secretary. While USDA and FEMA have created a one-of-a-kind conservation restoration plan to help the folks back at home, there's still some additional direction that I think we could benefit from with working with NRCS in New Mexico. And what I still hear from New Mexicans is about some of the confusing guidance coming from NRCS on these plans. In addition, there's also confusion as to how New Mexicans should then apply for other USDA programs. Now, my question, Secretary Vilsack, is can USDA do more to help New Mexicans recover from these fires?
Well, it sounds like we do. We recently allocated additional resources from a disaster fund to create additional resources available to New Mexico, to Vermont, and also to Alaska. But if there are issues relative to NRCS, I'm more than happy to reach out to Chief Crosby and make sure that we're paying attention to whatever the issues are and reducing whatever barriers that exist.
I appreciate that, Secretary Vilsack. As a matter of fact, Madam Chair, one of the visits with Kyle and Brandon was at one of those acequia gates with a local farmer that was impacted by the fires. And he had a few issues that he raised. And Mr. Secretary, I'll submit those in writing so we can just make sure that we're working with the team to get a response to those so that I can help Max better understand how to take advantage of those specific programs. Mr. Secretary, going forward, how does the department plan to implement the lessons it's learned from the recovery efforts in New Mexico into policy and practices? And the reason I ask that question is, to me, there's been this revelation when there's fire disaster across America, and in this case, in forest areas, whether it's FEMA or the federal government as a whole, will react to that fire, but then some of the flooding or some of the other aspects of that disaster that need to be included in some of these declarations. And then all the alphabet soup of the acronyms of every one of these agencies that has a responsibility to work with families in New Mexico. This is really one of the first. It's very unique, but I think there's some practices that maybe we learned here. And so what I'm looking to see is there a way that we can work together to ensure that if this happens anywhere else in the country, that some of these lessons learned from these families on the ground there, the leaders within USDA, that we can capture those and include them in policy?
I think so. I think one of the things we learned was the necessity of having a central location where all of our people are in one place at one time, available to talk to folks who have a variety of different issues depending upon the nature of the disaster and how it may have impacted their particular farm, their home, their community. We did this in a gymnasium, I believe, in New Mexico. I think we learned a lot from that particular experience, and I think we ought to be figuring out how to make that sort of a standard practice in response to disasters.
I appreciate that very much. One of the areas related to this particular fire in New Mexico, as you know, Mr. Secretary, with some of the reports and investigations that have been conducted, some of the prescribed burns weren't put out completely. As a matter of fact, on one of the investigations, I believe the folks that were looking at it put their hands over it and said, well, it's not hot. But they didn't use some of the infrared technology that is available to ensure that something is put out completely. And the question that I have, Mr. Secretary, is USDA now moving more aggressively to ensure when there are prescribed burns or other fires that got started, but when we're putting them out, that technology like infrared technology is being used to ensure that it's out completely and that it doesn't have a chance of spreading?
Again, another lesson learned from this is to basically have a much more extensive plan and thought process behind the prescribed burn, using all of the tools and technologies to ensure that it's safe and that it doesn't do the damage that we've seen in New Mexico. So yes, that's happening.
I appreciate that, Secretary Vilsack. And the last thing that I'll touch on, and I know you've heard this from a lot of our colleagues, is the importance of making sure that people that need to get food, that are hungry, that they're able to get that food with some of these supplemental nutrition assistance programs as well, and the conversations that are taking place with all of us here, but especially around kids. I think that we all agree, Democrats, Republicans, when we're talking about the most vulnerable in our communities and especially hungry kids, there's more that we can do to work together. And so, Secretary Vilsack, yes or no, will the recent updates to the Thrifty Food Plan help combat child poverty?
Well, I think it did. I think there's obviously more to do. I think the summer feeding program is also going to have a positive impact on child hunger and child poverty. The good news, as I mentioned earlier, is that in rural areas, for the first time in a while, we actually saw a reduction in the number of persistently poor counties in this country. We've actually, for the first time in over a decade, we've seen a population increase in rural America. So I think things are beginning to slowly improve. But obviously, there's a lot more work to do.
Appreciate it. I thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to follow up a little here on what my colleague, Senator Lujan, was talking about. We had a fire this week in central Nebraska that burned over 70,000 acres. And I'm thankful that currently there aren't any reported injuries, but obviously when you have a significant number of acres like that and the time of year it's taking place, getting hay bales as well as pasture, it's going to be an issue. So as we learn of the damages, I appreciate your commitment to work with my office and Nebraskans to get the necessary disaster assistance to producers in a timely manner.
Would encourage your team to take a look at our disaster at a glance document that basically outlines the various programs that could be available.
Great. I'd also echo sentiments that Senator Hyde-Smith spoke about with regard to our disaster programs, and I do have a bipartisan bill with Senator Lujan that would ensure that USDA has the authority to provide some of those advanced cost share payments for the Emergency Conservation Program and the Emergency Forest Restoration Program.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous. You know, a lot of times it takes a year or two to get those payments out, and you could see people out of business.
It's also important because what we're now seeing are disasters on top of disasters. I was up in New England where they had a flood, and just when they got things right, they got hit with another disaster, which basically eliminated all the good work they had done up to that point. So it is important, I think, and necessary for us to figure out a different mechanism for providing the help more quickly to people.
Yeah, it's we haven't had snow for a while. It'll come back. It's March in Nebraska, but we still have the winds, and that was the big issue with these fires that we had. I've also expressed concern previously that conservation dollars, I believe, need to be prioritized based on locally driven conservation needs. We have large resource concerns that I hear about in Nebraska, and it centers around water quantity and water quality, and those are not prioritized, nor are they permitted under IRA funding. About 65% of the practices funded in Nebraska from 2020 to 2022 were deemed only provisionally eligible or not eligible at all under the IRA. As USDA sort of considers what practices should be eligible under the IRA funding, is it accurate that if a state or a local NRCS office believes a practice should be eligible, that they must then use their own limited time and resources to make that case to USDA?
Well, I want to make sure that we're tracking on this, because I think Nebraska is part of the Western Water Initiative, where we've actually allocated resources above and beyond the IRA focused on this issue of water.
But I'm speaking specifically that the water projects don't qualify under the IRA. There are other programs they can qualify under, but not under the IRA. Is that correct?
I think that is correct. I could stand to be corrected, but I think that is correct. But there are other programs available with resources, with the normal budgeted resources that are available for that purpose.
Correct. But when you have over half of the programs in Nebraska that address water, that need to address water, and locally the NRCS offices in the past have always prioritized those and continue to, it limits the availability then to tap into what I believe are conservation practices that should be recognized when we talk about the IRA. That instead of it all being based on emissions, I think we should be able to recognize those.
I think it's based on the science that these practices will impact and affect greenhouse reductions or carbon sequestration. Again, the regular programs can be utilized for the purposes that folks at the local level feel are most appropriate.
I agree with that statement, but I also continue to push that those decisions need to be made at the local level, and passing a bipartisan bill that addresses just one segment, that local offices in a state recognize the need and prioritization of other resources, as in water quality and quantity. I'm concerned, I'm saddened that those are not recognized here by the federal government, by USDA anymore, as being important for the state of Nebraska.
Well, I think that's not what they're saying. Well, we're argue about this back and forth.
We're talking
it's not
back
about
and forth.
They're not being important. They are not necessarily climate smart.
We'll have a discussion sometime on that, because you understand the importance of water resources
right,
in the state of Nebraska and the value we have for that resource.
Absolutely, and that's why they're part of the Western Water Initiative, $1.9 billion being made available.
I think they're climate smart projects as well.
Well, fair enough.
So we differ on that. The USDA has been investing significant funds to increase independent processing capacity, and I thank you for that. We've seen a number of grants that have been awarded. 186 million went to 24 projects. Another 171 million went to some other projects. But yet we see the EPA now, their own regulatory analysis shows that if they take their preferred regulatory route, that anywhere between 16 to 53 of those processing facilities will close as a result. And my office has heard from a lot of small independent facilities that are concerned that EPA is maybe underestimating the impact of that, and they're worried their facilities are going to close. So while I thank you for the investment by USDA, are you worried? Are you worried about that?
We provided input to the to EPA, which is why their preferred alternative, I think, is limited to 16. They offered 3 options. The preferred alternative is limited to 16. The third option is the 58. And we'll continue to work with folks. I think we'll still continue to have a strong commitment to expanded processing. We're not finished with additional resources. We also put together a plan, a relending plan, so that facilities that may be on the edge now have access to credit to get them to a better place. So it may very well be that option is available to address whatever the EPA is requiring.
Yeah, and I appreciate that as well, because you know, we have the 3 of the 4 big processors in the state, but there's also a big movement in Nebraska, as you know, to have more localized processing plants, and the effect that has on rural communities, local producers is tremendous, and so people are getting a little leery, though, about that. And if I hear some questions, can we reach out to you on that then?
You bet.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, last but certainly not least, the senator from New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, Senator Bozeman and I wrote to you urging the USDA and the USAID to move quickly with the $1 billion purchase and shipment of U.S. commodities in response to the really unbelievable global hunger crisis. Tens of million people around the globe, as you know, are disproportionately women and children, really are on the brink of starvation. Do you have any update that you can share with us on that?
Senator, we are reliant on USAID for instructions and directions because they're the ones who actually administer the distribution of those resources. And I would be more than happy to reach out to Administrator Power and find out, you know, what her thoughts are, but we're anxious to move on this as quickly as they give us direction.
I appreciate it. The process has been dragging on way too long. The USDA controls the CCC funding, so I really ask that you make this a personal priority and do everything you can in your power to expedite this process. And I believe that the food aid is just a perfect example of why we need the USDA authority to utilize the CCC and not allow really any partisan riders to interfere with that in the future. So, Mr. Secretary, you know that I disagree with this administration and their position on Prop 12. We've discussed this before. I was really glad that the Supreme Court rejected it. And I disagree with some of the comments, at least I heard you made, that allowed states to enact laws, that allowing states to enact laws such as Prop 12 would lead to, I think your word was chaos. I don't think there's any evidence of this. And I hope you can understand, at least, maybe not agree with, but why millions of voters in states like California and Massachusetts, legislatures in states like Michigan and New Jersey, are just simply appalled by the way that pigs and chickens are treated in these large factory farms when they are immobilized in these tiny battery cages in these gestation crates. I hope you can understand why they have taken action to ban these inhumane practices. But even if you don't understand exactly that or agree that they're cruel practices, this is really an issue to me about democracy. And faith in our democracy, as President Biden has said time and time again, is at an all-time low, and he's rightfully declared, I think, democracy as one of the central causes of his presidency. And so with this issue of democracy, in my opinion, in question more than ever right now, at least in my lifetime, I hope that we can exercise some caution in whenever we consider overriding the will of people in states and interfering with the role that states have as laboratories of democracy. I don't always agree with a guy named Sid Miller, who I'm sure you're probably aware of, the Texas Agricultural Commission, but last week he published an op-ed in The Hill supporting California's right to enact Prop 12 entitled "Washington Don't Tread on States' Ag Rights," and I'd like to submit this for the record. Mr.
Without
Secretary,
objection.
thank you very much. You know that small farmers who raise animals more humanely from around the country filed a brief with the Supreme Court in support of Prop 12, and the Supreme Court actually cited that brief from American small farmers in its decision. The farmers argue that humane treatment laws like Prop 12 create actually a lot of market opportunities. And this is in light that in the 2022 USDA Ag Census shows that we have lost 9,000 hog farmers since 2017. These independent hog farmers, many of them in business for years or generations, have been driven out of business. And we should give these laws a chance to create the market opportunities for farmers that are willing to be humane, and it supports really the small farming model. So my question really, Mr. Vilsack, to put it simply, is, shouldn't we allow these, at least give a chance to create the market opportunities for these farmers and for our small farmers in America?
Senator, I have no problem with a state essentially directing how their farmers in that state should operate. They clearly should have the right to do that. I think the challenge is when they essentially try to extend that to other producers. And the court basically made the decision that this wasn't going to discriminate against hog producers because they had a choice. I'm not sure how much of a choice they actually have in terms of markets. And that's, frankly, we're trying to create more choice by expanding local and regional processing. So my concern is that if every state does what California does, then there's not going to be any consistency at all in the marketplace, and it's going to be very difficult for producers to know precisely what the rules of the game are.
Well, again, my concern is simply that, Big Ag is pursuing this as a way to squeeze out of the market a lot of the people that would actually benefit from Prop 12.
Okay, well, I think, to me, and you and I can disagree about this, but I think a better approach for those small and mid-sized producers is to figure out how their farm can generate multiple sources of income. And I think there are today ways that we've put in place to allow them to do this.
Yeah, and yet 9,000 small farmers have moved out of business. We're continuing to lose them. And maybe this gets to my last point. My time is running low. The USDA's Equity Commission released its final report. I was glad to see that one of those recommendations was the creation of the USDA Office of Small Farms. We're in a country right now where we're losing farms at an alarming rate. I've traveled through the Midwest, sat with families that have had farms in their family going back to the Homestead Act. And in order to ensure the small farms have full access to USDA programs, this was one of the recommendations. I've introduced a bill to create such an office and to ensure it has enough funding to meaningfully help small farmers, and have been pushing to get this included in the Farm Bill. And I just want to know, do you support this, the Equity Commission's
That would be helpful. That would be helpful. In addition, we need the resources to be able to provide cooperators outside of USDA to provide assistance and help as well. So I think it's both.
Thank you. And I mean, independent family farmers face outrageous challenges as the consolidated world of multinational big ag corporations continue to begin to dominate the market. We're seeing more and more consolidation, and that's why I think fighting for small farmers is so critical. That's why I think steps that like Prop 12 actually are supporting what small farmers are wanting to do. But I want to bring up one last point, which is just the issue of access to crop insurance. I know the USDA has been making new crop insurance products and changes to whole farm and micro farm policies to make them more attractive for producers. However, I'm learning and hearing from small farmers that they're not even able to purchase these products because agents and companies just won't sell to those independent small farmers. We have a major problem with the way we're incentivizing agents and companies to only service the largest farms. In many ways, the system seems to be more and more rigged against small farmers, independent family farmers. We need serious safeguards to ensure that every farmer has the opportunity to purchase crop insurance. The USDA already has the authority to address some of these issues, and I know I need to wrap up, but I'm going to submit some questions for the record on this topic, and I appreciate the minute and 10-second indulgence by the chair.
Senator, could you get me some details about the farmers that you've talked to? Because I'm more than happy to have RMA look into this.
I would love that, not only for my state, but across the country.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Really important questions. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. You can see the broad interest in the committee from all the members who've been participating. We know how important you and your agency are as we talk about supporting our farmers and our families in rural communities that we all agree we want to thrive, and we want people to be able to live in rural communities and have the fullness of opportunities. So thank you for your partnership, your dedication over the years, and we look forward to working with you as we go forward. So the record will remain open for 5 business days, and with that, the meeting's adjourned.